Welcome to Library-ish, a podcast by the Butte County Library, where we explore books, literacy, and the role libraries play in our communities.
In today's episode, we're taking a closer look at women who didn't just contribute to literature, they helped shape and transform it.
For much of literary history, women faced barriers to publishing, recognition, and inclusion in what we now think of as the literary canon.
And yet, despite those challenges, women have created genres, expanded storytelling, and brought new perspectives into literature that continue to influence what we read today.
In this episode, we'll highlight several authors whose work changed the direction of literature, along with one library leader who helped ensure those voices remain accessible.
We'll also explore how their contributions continue to shape modern reading, publishing, and library collections.
Let's go!
Woo!
Women changing literature.
Mhm.
It's an incredible topic. Happy to be talking about this topic because it's a rich topic with a lot of interesting
Yeah.
information.
And it's March, so it's Women's History Month.
It's Women's History Month. Have you ever picked up a book because it was written by a woman?
Most times when I go looking for books and authors and things, I gravitate towards women authors. I do. I
No,
just
that's fantastic.
well, I feel
it's the relatability.
yeah,
Isn't it?
as a woman reader, I feel that they kind of get me a little more. I've read male authors. I've read my fair share of Stephen King. I've read all the because in school the majority of authors that we read are male authors.
That's
They're
right.
men. They just are. They've always been that way. Every day is Male History Day. I sorry.
I like to say, every day is Men's History
It
Month.
really is, but I've read those and I don't feel that they quite understand. And so when I go to read a book, I prefer a woman author because especially when it comes to romance novels, which, fun fact, romance novels are the highest selling genre among all books, and they are almost double than the second highest selling, which is mystery and crime and stuff like that. And the majority of the people reading these are women.
Well, I mean, that goes back to when you think about the history of libraries too. Once libraries became more publicly accessible, like you have the men's clubs that had their collections, the societies and so forth. But once books sort of broke out of that paradigm, they were in beauty salons. They were in haberdasheries, hat shops.
I know. I love the word haberdashery. I'm so sorry.
Those are women's spaces. Certainly haberdasheries also existed for men, but they were in women's spaces when books became a more public pursuit, when it stopped being just academic adjacent. Women in general were reading more often than men were as a recreation.
Yes.
And that has maintained that social dynamic. I think has very much maintained, and you could see that sort of in the fact that romance novels are one of the number one genres, even in the YA books, which YA has become a huge genre. Many of those books are focused at women readers.
I looked this up actually. According to Book Riot, which is a very popular website, romance is the highest grossing genre, which took in over $1.44 billion in annual revenue on average. The second one was Mystery and Crime, and that was only $728.2 million.
Yep.
So
yeah.
Yeah, you want to make the money, you go into the romance.
Yeah, I remember they used to have classes for that because that's been going on for a long time.
People want to criticize it as much as they welcome to criticize as much as you like, but I mean, $1.44 billion in revenue. Who's gonna
and at least
snub
those
that?
people are reading.
Yeah, fair, 100% fair. But I gravitate towards women authors. I just feel that I relate to them a little more than I do male authors. And like I said, growing up in public school, every day is Men's History Day, and I've read Shakespeare, I've read all the ones that they have, and it's just I prefer. What about you?
I do as well. One of the things that I like to read about in my little nonfiction reading sort of journey is I like to read about mythologies, and I particularly like to read about women in mythology. And it's the female authors that I find provide the most unbiased reporting on those topics, that rather than having to reorient their lens to that form of archaeology or to that perspective of archaeology or the historic record, they tend to be coming from that point of view. So it's not as biased as a male author might be. And that can sometimes, as a female reader reading about ancient history or mythology, it can get a little annoying.
A little bit.
So not that all narratives in that area, all the modern narratives, like the one about Medusa sort of being
I was just gonna bring that one up.
yeah,
That one is so
about being a victim and then being a positive, vengeful character is very much a reinterpretation of that mythology through a modern lens.
It really is. Back in the ancient times, archaeologists would pull up shields from back in the day, and her face would be on them for protection. If she's such a villain, why is her face being utilized as protection? Somewhere, someone in this game of telephone, historical, archaeological telephone, missed something, because you've got the movies, the Clash of the Titans.
Yes.
You've got that where she's just evil. And if you actually read the mythology, if you actually go through and look at the history, she wasn't. She was a victim. She was victimized, and she took that punishment for being a victim and turned it into a strength.
The recharacterization, I mean, we see that a lot in literature, don't we? Even in things as modern as a movie like The Graduate.
Yeah.
Where the end of The Graduate at that period of time was a little bit of a cautionary tale, but was also considered romantic. Now we look at the end of The Graduate and go, romantic?
Red flag.
Yeah, exactly. It's weird and creepy and what? And society, the paradigms change of how we see ourselves and how we tell the stories that are meaningful to us and that frame our worldview. And that's just one of the ones that has changed. And a great deal of that change in perspective comes from the fact that there are more women in academia now, giving their academic perspective. The most recent translations of the Iliad and the Odyssey were done by a woman, and it changes the perspective entirely of the story, without the loss of narrative, without mistranslating. It's just the lens is different. And I think when women write, just like when anyone with any particular perspective that comes from their personal experience, when anyone like that writes, it gives everyone a new opportunity to examine those paradigms, to examine those stories, to examine those points of view. That's why it's so important not to have such a narrow cross-section of the population contributing to art, culture, whatever, music. It doesn't matter. The broader the contribution you have, the more enriched the culture and society is, because you're getting all these different perspectives. And that's where empathy comes from. And that's why reading more leads to having higher empathy, because you're taking all this stuff on board. So that's why we're exploring this topic today. And we're going to start out with the author Mary Shelley, because she is really the OG.
She really is.
She's really the OG. And her milestone work is Frankenstein. It was published in 1818. She first published it anonymously. I believe we all know the story of Frankenstein, which is about a scientist who challenges the boundaries of nature and animates a corpse into life. And what are the consequences? And then things get really crazy. So it's often cited as one of the first science fiction novels ever written. And she blended two emerging genres, which was Gothic literature, which was an emerging genre of fiction, and scientific thought, which was going through a renaissance at the time with the Enlightenment. And this was just, it was also inspired by personal experience. She had a few tragedies, one of which was having lost a child before having written this. She had had a nightmare about trying to revive this child. But there was also at the time a German short story about someone who had taken a corpse and reanimated the limbs. And this story had just been translated into English. So she took that short story and over a holiday trip in Europe, along with her partner, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and her friends, including Lord Byron and Lord Byron's partner. I think it was Byron challenged the group to a short story writing contest, and this is what she developed in that evening. And there's a movie directed by Ken Russell about the evening in which the story was composed. Yes, but it's a great story. What makes it important? It's probably the first traceable science fiction story ever written, shifts the supernatural focus of Gothic fiction toward rational scientific exploration. The cultural iconography of creating a monster and then creating that monster as the protagonist of a story, not just some mindless creature, but an actual character. In fact, talk about modern paradigms, it's often stated that the monster in the story Frankenstein isn't the creation. The monster is the scientist who created the creation.
And then abandoned him.
And then ran from him like a scared little girl. It's the philosophical and social critique on views of gender, education, social responsibility. It explores the themes in a metaphorical way of isolation, prejudice, and the responsibility of the creator toward the creation. It's just a very overlooked work in many ways because Mary Shelley was so young. She was only 19, which is incredible when you think about it. And so for many years, there were even rumors that Percy Shelley had actually written it. It's good to see her in the modern age getting the credit that she's due for writing such an incredible, layered story that impacts us today as deeply as any story you would find on the shelf by a modern author. So
she's amazing. Yeah, she's in some schools she's required reading because she invented a whole genre, and she's absolutely delightful.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, you mentioned while you were saying that she published her book anonymously. That was actually common back in the day, and the next author that I've got here did that with all of her books. Jane Austen. Oddly enough. Yeah, Jane Austen.
It's so wild to think of Jane Austen publishing anonymously.
It was very common, if not expected. If you were a woman author, you were to publish anonymously. And Jane published all of her books under the under the author By a Lady. That was how she published it. And it was to avoid the wrath of society, because a lot of society, especially the male members of society, would degrade you if you were an author back then, you know, as a woman. And so it was protection. It was also the fact that women weren't seen as serious authors, and publishers wouldn't want to put you on a shelf if you had a woman's name on it. You know, even the By a Lady was a risk, you know, so it was very common for women to publish anonymously back then, whereas, you know, the men were all like, blah, you know, give me all the credit. The women were, you know, and she
even sometimes stealing the work of women.
Yes, it made it so much easier when you couldn't put your name on things. Anyway, the system's great. So her first one that she published was Sense and Sensibility, and then she did Pride and Prejudice. She had a really interesting life. She was one of two girls in a family of that had, I think it was 6 boys. It was 8 kids total, and it was her and her little sister Cassandra. I think it was her sister Cassandra, and then all the boys. And her father worked with the clergy and all that stuff. Um, but they were, as was common back then, they were, schooled on a very individual basis. They went to the Abbey House School in Reading, where they were taught writing, spelling, French, history, geography, needlework, drawing, music, and dancing. And then after that, it was their education was done at home, which is very common back then. Yeah, but they went to this school, and they have had to come back because the whole school came out with, I want to say it was typhoid fever, and they called it like the festering something or other. And it's common with lice is what spreads it. I was looking that up. Yeah. And so they had to come back, and they had to make sure, well, her father died when she was a little older. And when that happened, her mother and her sister, which were the only ones at home because she didn't marry, they had much less income, and they had to live on means that were much less than what they were used to. Money was very tight. And they lived like this. She was about 29 years old when this happened, which is considered on the shelf. You were supposed to have been married back in your early 20s back then. And she, back in this time, when a woman got married to a man, she gave up her individuality. She gave up everything belonged to him. Everything that was once hers is now his. Anything that she would have had created, anything that she would have, all the things are his. And it's her job to take care of him, run the household, make the babies, which many, 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 many times ended in death. She actually, her brothers, like I said, she's one of 8, and her 6 brothers, I believe 3 or 4 of them lost wives to childbirth, and then had to get married again. One of her other sisters-in-laws, they think it's a brain aneurysm when they look back at it nowadays, but just fall dead in her 20s. I mean, these things were.
We don't really recognize in the modern age how common death used to be.
Very common. There
are some people that will go through their whole lives in our day and age without ever seeing a dead body. Meanwhile, during this period of time, you saw dead bodies. Often you were related to those people, and they were in your home. So
yeah, and
they live a very different life.
Back in this day, especially if you had a corrupt church in your area, it cost money to bury your dead in the churchyard. So people would keep their family members' dead bodies in their homes, until they could save up enough to buy a plot at a church, and that caused more disease, and it's bad times.
Yeah, whenever anybody's like, I wish we could go back to the good old days.
Yeah, no,
you don't. You don't.
I'm good with my indoor plumbing and my sanitized everything
and washing hands.
Yeah.
Germ theory.
Germ theory. No, I'm perfectly happy being here and not there. I'll have a Jane Austen themed party, but I will not. No. But anyway, so she never married, because that meant giving up a big piece of herself, and that meant risking her life in childbirth. That meant a whole host of things that she didn't want to do. And if you ever read any of her autobiographies, because there are a few, just biographies. After she died, her brother and nephews and, all these people that felt that they knew her decided to write about her. And they'll write about this love story with her and this man. And it just never came about. And it's all been romanticized. All of it has been romanticized. She has said that she never wanted to get married, never wanted to do this, because she would lose such a big piece of herself, which girl, got you. I 100% understand.
Same, bestie.
I get it, 100%. It's okay to choose to be single.
Absolutely.
Really. But to focus more on her writing, because that's her, and that's great. And she got sick, and she passed away, and after her death, her brother went to the publisher and fought to put her name on everything, which I thought was admirable.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah, instead of doing a host of other things that he could have done, he went and he fought, and they decided after her death to put her name on all the pieces of writing. That's how we know that they were hers, because he did that. But in this time, this was because she was born in 1775. In this time in Great Britain, they were dealing with a number of skirmishes with France, a number of wars, and France would come in and make trouble in the country. There was unrest inside the country as far as what was considered treason. Habeas corpus was suspended, which is the right to a trial. So a lot of authors back then were scared. You'll find a lot of novels that were written back in that time took place in the 1500s.
Right.
They took place elsewhere because it was kind of dangerous.
It's a powder keg to confront the political vagaries of the current era. So it's very easy to take your story and put it in another time period and go, I'm not writing about now.
Yeah, this is something way back then.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, or another place like, Charles Dickens wrote Tale of Two Cities. It was a warning to Great Britain about, but he wrote about France.
Right.
That was the French.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with me, mon ami. That was about them.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jane Austen wrote about common day, common characters, common time, common themes, but she hid it in the disguise of a floofy little romance novel. So nowadays we look back and we're like, it's a romantic comedy. Look, it's Mr. Darcy and it's Elizabeth Bennet. And aren't they beautiful? They're so romantic. Let's have a party. That's not what it was back then. And back then they didn't look at the free dating like we do now. Now with all of our advantages for common society, people can go out and date, people can have fun, and people can do all that. Marriage was not looked like that then. It was, like I said, she never wanted to get married because she would risk her life in childbirth, because she would give up her rights to a man, because of all these things. It was looked at in a much more serious light. And when you read, I would recommend reading at least one of her books, and I would do Pride and Prejudice. If you're just starting out, start out with Pride and Prejudice. It really is. It's one of her most popular ones. It's delightful. There's so many themes hidden in there that while you're reading, you're just like, I see what you did there. I see what you, and if you can get one of the published books that has a little footnotes that lets you know what time was like back then, I think Penguin does a couple of those that has little footnotes about the time back then, because it really does matter. Because she didn't write romantic comedies. These aren't little floofy romance novels, which I love. Don't get me wrong. Like I said before, I love those. That's not what this is. She wrote criticizing the government and criticizing the times and criticizing the patriarchy and criticizing the clergy and criticizing all these things. But she did it in a way that hid it, because if she didn't hide it, she would be very, very, very in a bad spot.
She'd be in trouble.
Very much trouble.
She'd be in trouble.
Yeah. So a lot, and like I said, start with Pride and Prejudice. That's a great one. There's one scene in there that I really liked, because one of the main characters in there is an army man, is a militiaman. And they're shown as these, kind of frat boy like guys that go out and they party and they make trouble. And they weren't supposed to be seen like that. They represent the crown. It's not supposed to be like that. I mean, we look at that and they're like, yeah, like frat boys, like army guys, they come into town and they party. And it's no, they weren't supposed to be seen like that.
That's lifting a veil.
Yeah.
That wasn't supposed to be lifted.
Yeah. So it was actually really risque of her to write like this. And she did for all of her novels. A couple of them were really blatant and a couple of them were really, really hidden. But for the most part, she revealed beliefs that were not just about domestic life and relationships, but were about wider political and social issues of the day. And it's really interesting. And so if you do decide to pick up a Jane Austen book, think of it like that. Don't think of it like, it's going to be so great. It's going to be like the Bridgertons. We're going to have some fun and everybody's going to dance in a ballroom and, they're just going to get married. It's not that.
And also don't think of it as, the stuffy thing where everybody's right and the women are all oppressed and the women are because she's not that either.
No. They were only in a, and when I say poor, I don't
it
mean
seems
poor.
like it's going to be old fashioned because
No.
it's a classic, and
Mm-mm.
they're decidedly
No.
not.
It's
It
actually
is
quite
very
readable.
modern and
It
very
is.
readable.
It's very readable. And that's why I said start with Pride and Prejudice. When I was in high school, I started with that one. And that one was, I loved it. As a kid, I
Right.
loved it.
And that's why people get so engaged by her, is because it does ring so true. The relationships between men and women, the social expectations on men and how they should behave and how they should interact with women, and on women and how they behave and what their interactions with men should be like. It is very, she definitely analyzes
she's
those
amazing.
things very deeply.
She's really great. And like I said before, don't think of her as romantic comedy, which is what everyone kind of looks at her like nowadays.
It's also
That's
the
not-
movies are so reductive.
They are.
Even
They
the good
miss
ones
it.
are
Yeah.
like, we have to make it about the beautiful people in the picture.
But it's not.
That's not what the book is about.
You miss so much. There's a scene that I loved in Pride and Prejudice about Lydia, which is the littlest sister in the Bennet household, who's kind of wild. She's kind of wild. She just doesn't.
Yes.
And there's a whole scandal that happens with her that I'm not going to tell you if you want to read it. But they're
no spoilers.
Right. They're shopping in the town square, and she has bought a bonnet, which a hat. It's a fancy word for a hat. She's bought a bonnet, and she's like, I don't really like it, but I figure I can take it home and change it and make it something that I like. And that gives you a little insight to what her character is. And she's just one of these women that feels that, she can control the narrative. She can make anything how she wants. And it turns out that's not really how life works. And it's a really great book. I would really recommend it. And Jane Austen's a fantastic writer, and I've monopolized a lot of this time talking about her. So I'm going to kick it back to you, Tracy.
So the next author I'm going to talk about is George Eliot. Don't let the man's name fool you. Her actual name was Mary Ann Evans. And her milestone work was Middlemarch, which was serialized. So she published in magazines. She was like a pulp author, just like Jules Verne and at the time. And this was 1871 to 1872. There was a particular reason why she chose a male pseudonym. You may have heard it's the same reason that J.K. Rowling chose a male pseudonym in the modern era. It's because books by men generally tend to be received in a different way.
No.
It's very much like the sort of an escalation in a way of the writing anonymously that was done by Jane Austen, which was slightly earlier in the narrative, in the social record. By using a male pseudonym, she was able to be reviewed seriously. She reached broader audiences. It avoided gender bias in reviewing of her work. And she had already been a respected editor and translator for quite a while before becoming a novelist. So she was well familiar with the world of publishing and understood that in the 19th century, her two options were to publish anonymously or to publish with a male pseudonym. And she wanted the credibility and the financial success that would come with a male name. So that was literally why she chose it. And this was not her only influential work. She also wrote the story Silas Marner. She wrote many very well-respected books and poems and things like that. In fact, one of the things that was stated about her from Virginia Woolf, interestingly, was that she was the only author that wrote for grown-up people in the English lexicon.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So the things that made her work, Mill and the Floss is also hers, and Adam Bede. So she was writing a lot of insightful examinations of human motivations. And she also was very much a naturalist in the way she wrote. The voice, meaning the style that she wrote in, was not as affected as many other authors of the time. She really tried to write people living the way they experienced life in general in the real world, not to try to create a fictional narrative that would draw people in or that would play on the modern social niceties that were seen in normal fiction at the
Mhm.
time. Her books had psychological depth, moving beyond plot-driven stories to explore the internal lives and emotions and the moral dilemmas presented to her characters, using very complex metaphors and using imagery, which was very unusual for the time. The realism and social commentary that she offered was meticulous. And she explored how individuals are shaped by society and culture and their cultural restraints.
Mhm.
Again, that kind of multi-layered writing was not typical for the time. There was an intellectual sophistication to her work, because she had been editing for the Westminster Review and translated philosophical works primarily
Mhm.
in her career as a translator. And she was a respected intellectual on that basis, on her
Mhm.
own. So the novels display that intellectuality. They display her knowledge of her studies in ethics
Mhm.
and her studies of aesthetics. Uh, and she was able to present those because of using a pseudonym without the asterisk added of, yeah, but she's a woman.
Yeah.
Um, Also, uh, even though she used a pseudonym, her work helped to advance the women's status as authors and as feminists
Mhm.
and as people in society. Um, she did gain recognition for her work as herself within her lifetime. And because of that, there was a period of time where she was thought of as the singular greatest living English novelist. This went a long way to paving the way for women to become authors in the future,
Mhm.
because it's a little bit of the okey doke. If you're they're not there are no takes backsies. Once you read something and you
Yeah.
say this is profound, this is insightful, this work has value, what does it say about your judgment if you find out the author is a woman and go, oh no, well then I take that all
No
back?
takesies backsies.
Right. That what that means is it's
Mhm.
kind of like the critics that then accepted her work and lauded it were forced into having to acknowledge that a woman had the intellectual capacity,
Mhm.
which you may question whether people would question that. But in this period, in the people would question whether the women had the intellectual capacity to
Mhm.
create valid works of literature. And after finding out and her getting the credit as a woman for writing these works, there's no way that a critic
Mhm.
could retain their own dignity and social standing and rescind the credit that they gave her for her work. It's like sometimes you have to go in through the back door. Well, she went in through the back door.
Yeah.
She got the credit she deserved. And that made the way for writers, women writers in the
Mhm.
future.
You mentioned Virginia Woolf. Virginia Woolf was so interesting to research. She was a pip. Oh my gosh. So she was a feminist writer, which was rare back in her days.
Mhm.
And she always harpered a little let me see. She was born in 1882. Okay, so back in the day in 1882 where when Virginia Woolf was born, um she didn't get to go to school. Her brothers did. They were sent to the big schools. They were sent to, all the
Mhm.
really big schools, and they got to have this really great education
Mhm.
because her father was considered a man of letters. Her mother was. They were all up into
Mhm.
intellectual society, but she and her sister didn't get to go and do any of that
Mhm.
because they were girls. The boys did though. The boys got to go to school and the boys got to be educated and the boys got to do that where the girls didn't get anywhere near what the boys did. Um, and she always harbored a little bit of resentment for that because it's not fair.
Mhm.
I mean, and honestly, nowadays when we think, I don't know any of her brothers' names. They are all lost to history, you know. And she's here. Imagine the things that she could have done if they had actually invested in her. Like she deserved to be. She was very interesting. She has what would now she had, excuse me, what would now be considered bipolar disorder.
Mm,
She had episodes of extreme mania, where she would
that's so
be
rough.
yeah, she would be up and she would be going and she would be excitable and she'd be talking and she'd be just no sleeping. She would just be like bam, 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 followed by times of so incredible depression. Just she would be almost comatose for days, and they didn't know what to call it back then. It wasn't a thing back then.
They probably said she would get hysterical.
Yeah, it was that kind of thing. It was she had 3 nervous breakdowns that are, written on the thing. The first one, when her mother died, she had her first breakdown. The second one, when her father died, she had another breakdown. Her brother died, that she like people keep dying, and she would have these reactions to these things that would cause, breakdowns. But within this, she did write. She did do these things. She had published. Her brothers were in publishing, and that helped her get her works published and things along those lines. But she was so very interesting because just how she chose to live was outside of what was considered normal for Victorian England. She lived in a house with multiple men that were not her husband, and her father disagreed with this. He said it was too bohemian for him. And these men in this household with her had relations with women, with men, with 2 of them proposed marriage to her, and she said no.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 of them decided to make a relationship with one another.
Mm-hmm.
They were crass. They were, this is where she thrived, though. This is
Mm-hmm.
it was very unconventional and very bohemian, but this is where she
Mm-hmm.
thrived. One of her sister, her sister, excuse me, Vanessa is her name. She was married to a man, but he started a relationship with another woman. So she started a relationship with another man, man. And they would just they would do these things where in this high society thing, they would just kind of have these relationships.
Well, I will say that, I haven't necessarily touched on the personal lives of Mary Shelley and George Eliot to the same degree, but I will just tell you,
Mm-hmm.
their personal lives were very similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There was a lot of this going around.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's where, especially in America, the sort of anti-intellectual, oh, they're all weirdos and bohemians and so forth. But they all have similar stories in this period.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just had to interject
Mhm.
that like they all had
She
kind
was
of
very interesting. Very interesting.
yeah.
I bring this up just because she was one of those unique writers that, because she lived a very interesting life and she lived with this very interesting perspective, her writing kind of reflected that. She was popularized for the stream of consciousness narration. Her novels like The Mrs. Dalloway and To the Lighthouse. The one that she's really known for is a very short one. It's an essay called A Room of One's Own. And
Mhm.
what that one does is it examines women writers and the writing produced by women in regards to society and what is considered proper and things like that. And she says the whole point of this is that if you want women to be good writers, they can be good writers. They can be excellent writers. They can be better writers than their male counterpart. But you need to give them space, and you need to give them the finances, the comfortableness to do so. If you
Mhm.
take away the space and you take away
The
finances,
resources.
they're
Mhm.
not going to be able to do that. And that's what has happened to women to this point. Remember Jane Austen? She didn't want to get married because the man would control everything and she would have to be
Mhm.
stuck with childbearing and all that other stuff. The more men control the women, the less they can produce. If you step back and let us produce something, then we would produce amazing things. And
Mhm.
she did. She had so many decent pieces of work that not only put a lens on society back then, but also reflected her life. She often put family members, with different names. The names have
Right.
been changed to protect the innocent, uh, in her books to reflect, these people. And she's been quoted, talking about modern fiction and saying that we need modern fiction because as a society we are changing. And the fiction needs to change with us. Men are changing, women are changing, we as people change. Modern fiction is important because we need to reflect that change.
And, we've talked about the Industrial Revolution before on this podcast. She's writing at the beginning of that huge paradigm shift.
This was post World War I society. And World War I, World War II, all the men are being shipped off to Europe. All the men are being shipped off to the war to fight, and to make society, and to make society run, women have to do things that aren't, usual in the hearth and homestead.
Young men dying on a scale that was unprecedented up until then.
Oh my goodness. Trench warfare really gave everybody an awakening.
The brutality
of it. Yeah.
And women of that generation having to take up that mantle, and yet have such an important role in keeping society going, yet not allowed to provide social commentary because they're carrying all that burden.
Yeah.
So, the next figure we're going to cover is one of the most famous American authors that we have, Zora Neale Hurston. Her milestone work is Their Eyes Were Watching God, that was published in 1937. She was a major figure of the Harlem Renaissance. And she was also an anthropologist who wrote many books on Black folklore, both American and international. She was a trained anthropologist and used her studies on Black folklore and hoodoo in the U.S. South and Caribbean to enrich her work. She grew up in the first incorporated all-Black city in Florida. And so was able to see what a functioning society would be like if there was no racial conflict. She didn't have to experience that. But unfortunately, at the age of 13, her mother died and her father remarried, and she did not get along with her stepmother, ran off, and spent about 10 lost years. At 26, she showed up in Baltimore and lied about her age and decided to get a high school diploma.
As one does.
She speed ran her high school education, immediately got into college, and her training as an anthropologist was under Franz Boas at Columbia, who was, she specifically studied field work and collecting Black folklore, but he was one of the great early anthropologists in academia. She wrote a biography of Herod. She was very well known for being the life of the party. She was not a drinker, but wherever she was the party. Her works focused on Black women's agency, which is in particular why Their Eyes Were Watching God is important, because it focused on her protagonist's journey towards self-discovery and empowerment and personal voice, and her use of Black women as protagonists for her stories was absolutely revolutionary for the time. She also wrote many plays and works of poetry, so she worked in many areas of writing, not just necessarily in fiction. She used an authentic dialect and voice in her work, precisely capturing African American vernacular and oral traditions. She did not present a sanitized version that would appeal to the white reader.
It's not her job.
Her job was to present Black culture for Black readers and whomever else was ready to come along for the journey. She also had an individualist perspective, which was different from many of her contemporaries. She was a vocal champion of individual rights and character over political protest. She emphasized the internal life of her characters more than anything. Unfortunately, the most she ever received as a payment for any one of her works was $950 approximately. She never was able to profit from her work. And in fact, much of her work fell out of print. It was rediscovered in the 1970s due to advocacy work by authors like Alice Walker and so forth. So it took her a long time to become recognized as the classic of American literature that she is. But she definitely influenced others coming after her with her style and her content. And her work has been very influential. One of the great American writers that we have.
That's delightful.
Yeah.
So, Tracy, the next person that I have I want to talk about is Toni Morrison. She was the first Black woman to win a Nobel Prize in Literature. That was for her jazz. It's called Jazz, when it's about the 1920s and all the racism and stuff like that happened back in the 1920s. She writes a lot about the history of Black culture.
She in many ways took the torch from
very
Hurston.
much, very much. I mean, Toni Morrison, I mean, this is relatively recent. She died in 2019. You know, really, really recent. She won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction for her book Beloved. Beloved is based on a true story. The story of Margaret Garner. Gosh, this is a story where a young girl, an enslaved person who escapes from, you know, that life, and she's running, but she realizes that she's not going to make it. She realizes that she's going to be captured again and she's going to be taken back into that life. And instead, because she has her daughter with her, her infant daughter, instead of her daughter going through that life and going through all the horribleness that comes with it, she chooses to unalive her daughter, as opposed to her daughter having that experience. Which, I got 3 kids, and I'm sitting there going, to be at that point and to choose that over the other things, it really, it just take a second to think about that, you know, just for perspective alone. And I'm a white woman talking from a position of entitlement,
great privilege,
you know. And it just, to be in that position and to have, and this isn't even something that she just kind of made up on a whim. This is based on someone else, you know. And in this story, she does that. The girl gets taken back into where she has just escaped from, and the spirit of her daughter comes back to haunt her. And this, like I said, this is a heavy read. It's very heavy, but I feel, especially in today's climate, it's necessary. And it's very well written. It's almost poetic in a way. And she won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction for that particular one. She won, I believe it, did I say the jazz one? She won, was it the Nobel Prize? Yeah. She won the Nobel Prize in Literature for her jazz. She won the Pulitzer Prize in fiction for this one.
She's written so many. The Bluest Eye.
The Bluest Eye, which is about beauty standards. She's really known for her nonlinear narrative and memory to explore the psychological legacy of slavery, and that's in her Beloved. Like I said, it's heavy. It's a heavy read, and make sure you're prepared, because it's important. Just because it's heavy does not mean it's unimportant, because it is the opposite. It is important, but prepare yourself before you read this. This isn't a light, fluffy Emily Henry novel, which I read like candy. This is a very heavy and very, very big thing. But it's considered masterpieces of American literature. It's been adopted into film. Oprah and Danny Glover starred in one of the versions of it. She's done a lot of great things. She wrote one called Paradise, was in 1998, a richly detailed portrait of Black utopian society and community in Oklahoma. A Mercy in 2008 deals with slavery and social class in the 17th century America. She's got so many books, and they all take a lens to the thing that a lot of people don't want to take a lens to. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
The central theme of her books and her novels and everything is the Black American experience in an unjust society. Her characters struggle to find themselves in their cultural identity. She utilizes fantasy. Like I said, in Beloved, it's the ghost that comes back. She utilizes all these great motifs, all these great themes. She received the medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2012, which I think it was Obama.
Yeah, I think that's Barack Obama.
That was Obama that gave that to her. And there is a documentary about her called "The Pieces I Am" that came out in 2019, because that's when she passed.
So those are the authors we're going to cover today. One person, in addition, that we wanted to cover was an important librarian. Her name is Clara Stanton Jones, and she was the first Black president of the American Library Association. She started her first term in 1976, and what made her term so important was that during her term, the Resolution on Racism and Sexism Awareness was passed. And this was a landmark policy adopted to fight discrimination within the library profession, mandating that libraries actively combat systemic racism and sexism. Some of the key commitments are surveying library school criteria for training on racism and sexism, developing in-service training for library personnel, reforming cataloging practices to eliminate bias, and to raise awareness among library users of systemic racism and sexism. Basically, it marked a significant shift in the ALA, where we officially stated that libraries should not be neutral on the topics of racism and sexism. And this was obviously, for obvious reasons, groundbreaking. Basically, the resolution reflected and continues to reflect the effort that we put in to promote equity within our association and within our profession, with aligning to later efforts to combat censorship of materials dealing with racism and with sexism in cataloging and in all areas of information and information access. So that's Clara Stanton Jones, very important figure. She had 9 honorary doctorates when she left the position. Yeah, she just an amazing figure. And we owe her a great debt of gratitude in our profession. So just wanted to touch on her a little bit, because what affects libraries affects literature.
Yep. As we've seen, the impact of these women goes far beyond individual books or authors.
They expanded what literature could be, challenged who gets to be heard, and helped shape the stories that continue to define our culture.
Their work also reminds us that the literary canon is not fixed. It evolves over time as new voices are recognized and preserved.
And that's one of the roles libraries continue to play, providing access to a wide range of perspectives and ensuring those voices remain available to future readers.
Whether you're revisiting a classic or discovering a new favorite, there's always more to explore. For more resources, recommendations, and programs, visit your local Butte County Library branch or explore our online services.
Thanks for listening to Library-ish.
Bye!
Bye.